So what's the karmic connection between us and our pets? What about pets and their past lives? What's going on with our animal friends? I have a very interesting example and case to share with you coming up right after this. Good afternoon, this is Lucky Links. I'm really excited about sharing this video, these experiences with you in this video. I actually got permission from a client of mine to share the information that I'm about to share. I have a lot here. When I do a crystal mirror for someone, there's a whole lot of information that goes into it. There's a whole lot of notes. I work on this situation for a few hours before I actually meet with the person, and then we discuss what was uncovered. In this particular case, a client of mine, a regular client of mine, asked me specifically would I look into the karma, the past lives, and the connections between her and her canine friend. And I have always been one of those people who is I have a hard time understanding how anyone could think that animals are somehow different from us as humans, that we are all beings, and that they would think that they don't go on after their death. You know, I was raised in a tradition where people were like, well, animals don't go on. They don't have souls or whatever. And I always thought, I'm like, you're crazy. I always thought that was crazy. I knew it was crazy from the time I was a kid. Well, here I got an example here that was so fascinating that I'm going to share it here. I've had a lot of experiences, as I'm sure all of you have had, with animals. I had a very special connection with a border collie of mine. I had 3 dogs actually. My last. The one you guys might have seen, the Staffordshire Terrier who was in the videos with me occasionally. He passed last year, which was extremely hard. But so I mean, this is a very charged subject, and but I had a border collie, and I'm going to tell you a couple of things that happened with her that confirmed the past life connection. And then I'm going to tell you about this client and what happened here. When I met my border collie, it was in a shelter, and I had just lost a ferret, and had decided that I was gonna get a dog, and I had always grown up with dogs. So I went to a shelter where I was living in Illinois, and I walked in, and she was 2 years old. She was an adult border collie, and she jumped up on the fence in the kennel. She jumped up the minute I walked in and looked me right in the face, and then she sort of went like this, and then she went and sat down, and I immediately knew there was a connection. And then there was another dog in there too that I also found a connection with, and I connected with both of them, but I knew the border collie and I had a connection. She also had a name. Her name in this life was actually the name of a childhood toy I had, a stuffed toy I had when I was a child. The name I'd given the stuffed toy, this dog had, and I didn't give it to her, she had it, which I thought was fascinating. And I took her out to walk her out in the yard, and she starts, trying to lead me, and I said, look, this is between you and me right now. You recognize who's boss at the moment, and everything will be fine with us. And then she looked at me, she sat down, and then we were like, okay, we have an agreement. And she began to challenge that from that moment forward, every chance she got about who was the boss. However, she was my best companion. I will say she was an incredible companion. Insanely smart. I built an obstacle course for her in my backyard so that she didn't get bored, because when she got bored, she was very elaborate in how she took care of things. But let me just say this, that when I met His Holiness Padma Rinpoche, I had already had a sense that I knew this border collie from somewhere else, and I even had a sense of how I knew her. I wasn't fully sure, but I had a sense. And from the first moment I saw her, I looked in her eyes and I felt like she was tired. She had made a poor decision in a past life about being fed up with being a human, and that was how she ended up a dog. And her entire time with me, she demonstrated her frustration on being a dog and not being a human. And she was so human in how she behaved that I knew that was the story. But one of the eeriest moments that I had was when His Holiness Padma Rinpoche, my master, he knew her, and there was a moment when he called her by her past life name, and she startled, and then she walked to him. That was one of the most interesting experiences I've had with. There was a lot more actually that went into it. She used to show up when we were doing empowerments, when we were doing Losar, which is Tibetan New Year celebrations. Whenever His Holiness would teach you, she would come, she would sit right in, she would get in the middle of it. When we were getting empowerments or blessings on, say, Losar or whatever, she would get in line with the rest of us. She would get in line, and then she would walk, waiting her turn. And then when she got to the front of the line and it was her turn, I'd have to lift her up, and then he would, bless her with the saffron water and everything that he was doing. It was it was a very strong connection. And I still, to this day, she's one of the greatest friends I've ever had in this life. So I know this is a powerful topic, and I had many experiences. There's something we do in Tibetan Bon called symbol reading, where we can be near a person and we can actually use energy to read the person's symbol. We push the energy into the person and the symbols into the person, and then we start to get a scene of what the person's past life was. And in cases where the both of you were there together, you'll both start to see it, and you can start to describe to each other what's going on. It's a fascinating experience, and I used to do that at festivals. I used to symbol read for people, and the past life stuff come by. And I've done a lot of past life hypnosis for people. I've done a lot of symbol reading for people, and I've used other methods, including this, to read for people. So in my years of doing this, I've had a lot of experience doing past life stuff with people, and sometimes I'll be reading for a person, and I just get flashes of it. I don't usually tell the person, because I think in a lot of what's happening in the psychic world, I think people take advantage of that, and I think people they don't have an answer for something, or they're not reading, and so, well, it's a past life, and then they'll set people down. And I've seen people get sort of addicted and hooked on something that wasn't really helpful, that was more of an ego trip. But sometimes when it's really essential to a person's healing or something else and it comes up, it will come up. And recently I was dealing with something, and actually His Holiness Padma Rinpoche said to me, look, you look at what happened to you 100 years ago and see if this is related. And it very much was. And my border collie was also there. So interestingly enough, a couple of days later, one of my clients came to me and she says, hey, can you find out what the connection is between me? She had just gotten a new dog. She just gotten 2 new dogs. And I said, yeah, well, this is what we can do. I can do a crystal mirror on her. I can see what's going on in her world right now elementally. I can see everything that's happening. And then I can look at what was going on with her ego, say 20 years ago, because she's only about 3 or 4 right now. And then what was going on with the ego will tell me what was happening with when she was in the other form, and which I was curious about, because I was wondering if she was an animal or if she had been another being, another kind of being, because that would come through. And then I also wanted to look at it with things like the I Ching and other stuff. So I looked at it from like 5 different angles. Okay. And employed some pretty neat, pretty spooky Tibetan Bon cosmology processes that enabled me to get a picture that I thought was so fascinating. So the first thing I did was the crystal mirror. And when I did the crystal mirror, which is the map of her life, everything showed up jealousy, which was kind of interesting. There was jealousy all over it. So I knew there was a pride issue going on. And my client confirmed it. There's 2 new dogs in the house, and there's a whole lot of people in the house now who are taking her attention away. Since everything's been happening, there's some more people living there. There's some things going on that's taking the attention away from her, and she's insanely jealous, and her whole world is characterized by jealousy right now. So that was the first part. And with what I've been talking about in terms of purification, right now, when I do readings for people and some being is going through a challenging time, I look at what the nature of that challenge is to tell me perhaps what's being purified for them. So knowing that this is what we call a pure land, and I've said in other videos, you incarnate in a pure land for one of 2 reasons. Either you made a vow to reach enlightenment, or you made a wish to end suffering. And so I was wondering why this particular canine of my client, why she ended up in this particular place as a dog. And if she's here as an animal, something is probably being purified, a habit that actually put her in the animal realm. And now, I'm going to be very careful here. I'm going to be very, very careful here, because I am not a Banku. I am not qualified to teach because I'm still a student. However, I can share what I know from my experience, and I can share from this experience what happened and what was revealed through the processes that I employed, and through the processes then that were confirmed between the client and I. So I shared a little bit of my understanding and my knowledge as a student of what happens in the 6 realms where we incarnate. And I know from my years as a student, and from my years of doing readings, and my years of dealing with past life stuff, and my years of what I know of the 6 realms where we incarnate, one of them being the human realm and one of them being the animal realm, which are overlapping here, okay? So it was my sense as I was going into this, that she was incarnated as a dog in a pure land because something is being purified, especially because it's happening at this particular time in human history when so much is being purified. So that's what I looked for right away. So I asked specifically what was, and I phrased the question in a very specific way to show the outcome from 20 years ago in her life. And this was the story that came out, okay? Using a variety of tools, this was now the first set of tools I used oracularly, we'll put it that way, came up with this story. Okay, and then after that, I approached it with the I Ching, and that's when I approached the same story with the I Ching. That's when I got chills. So I have my notes here on my I made on it along with this, and I'm gonna tell you some of the things from the notes because there was a lot. So she was a woman in her past life who had a son and a husband, so she had a family. Okay, and she was, the other thing I did was I looked up some of her birth information. I did not do a complete chart on her, but I did know her general tendencies based on her birth animal. And that particular sign does tend to deal with a lot of pride, which confirmed what I was seeing in the crystal mirror too, relating to the jealousy, okay? So she was very proud at the time. So she had this habit then and brought it in with her, which tells us in the ancient Tibetan Bond teaches us that our habitual patterns, our karma, affects how we are reborn and comes with us into where our ego doesn't. These particular habitual patterns do. And it affects the way our body is born. It affects the way we're born. It affects what form we're in. It affects all of these things. To simplify from my experience with all of this as a student and as someone who's looking at this, I'm like, okay, so her pride was probably involved in why she was reborn as a pooch. So she was very proud of her family, and she had a feeling that her son and her husband, there was a feeling that her son and her husband were at odds. Now here's the tricky thing. The son was rather reckless, rash, angry, stubborn, and forceful, okay, and rather destructive. Her husband was a rather sensitive man who very much did care about the whole family. He cared about the whole family and what happened to everyone. But he was at odds with his son. Now, it's not that he didn't love his son, it's just that his nature and his son's nature were at odds. Now, here's the thing. He was not so demonstrative as the prideful wife would have liked. She wanted a lot of attention, and her son, as he grew older, told her and gave her the attention and told her everything she really wanted to hear. Okay? Now, he was very good at telling his mother what she wanted to hear. Meanwhile, her husband, who really did care about both of them and really wanted to see the health of the family, said, look, it's not right to indulge him in these things. His behavior's not right. We have to... Now, he had his issues too, but she was kind of at odds with him for it, and he kind of felt like he was on the outside. Like there was a connection between mother and son, but he was on the outside. Okay? So her son was reckless, and she denied basically what was going on with her son's recklessness and her husband's sensitivity, and he felt at odds with both his wife and his son, and he did not feel heard or appreciated. So what came out of this eventually, of her not really acknowledging her husband's concerns and her indulging her son's recklessness, was a situation arose where her son ended up killing her husband. Okay? At that point. Now, I'll jump ahead because I did want to know what ended up with the son after he was responsible for his father's death. I wanted to know what ended up with him, and it was very clear that he ended up in a situation where he was locked away, imprisoned, he was separated from her and locked away. Okay? So now we've got our poor pooch friend here who's now a dog, who in this last life experience had an experience where she was very proud about her family. She really wanted everyone to sort of envy her and her family. She wanted this was her whole life. She wasn't really acknowledging what was going on in the family. The dynamic got out of hand. Her husband ended up dead, and her son ended up in prison. So this first lesson we can learn is you got to pay attention to what's really going on and not ignore it. And she was trying to make sure that everyone knew how their family was sort of perfect. Okay? So what happened though when this happened was her whole world came crashing down on her, and she really had nowhere to go with this. As a mother, you love your son. She did love her husband. She could not come to terms, no matter which way she tried to twist it in her mind, she could not come to terms with what had happened. She had nowhere to turn, and in the end, she went to the church. Now, there was a church connection here, and this is where the story gets particularly sad. What happened at that time was she had a great deal of bitterness in her heart for what had happened. She condemned herself for hating her son, because at this point she hated her son for what happened, but she still loved him. She felt like she lost everything, and she had no way to go without guilt, shame, pain. She was really in her own hell. And what could happen at this point is someone who's in a hell like that could end up reincarnating in a place that's not so nice. She kept on. She could have despaired, but she kept on. She tried to make amends. She tried to fix it. She was worried about the soul of her son, what would happen to him in the afterlife. She was worried about what would happen to her husband. And at this point, the church intervened. There was a particular priest. Now, she was, from what I gathered in the divination, she was a very attractive woman who very much liked to, she took care of herself very well, and she liked to present herself in a very way, and the priest had a thing for her. Now, instead of really tending to what was going on with her and her true pain, he told her whatever he could tell her to get her to keep coming back so he could spend time around her. Now, on her side of things, nothing in the divination or nothing in the story indicated that she reciprocated with the priest. However, that didn't matter. The priest kept wanting her to be around him. So he told her that God would forgive them. They'd all be together in heaven. She didn't have to worry. She just had to pray, everything. She got more and more bitter, more and more empty, more and more lonely, more and more in pain, and felt more and more isolated. Okay? In her end, all of this anger and sadness that she had really wasn't purified, because she basically started listening to everything the priest told her and everything that the church told her, and instead of being able to really get through and manage all of this, she just kept pressing it down, and saying, oh, well, in the end, God will forgive me. That was what really caused the problem in her rebirth process. From everything indicated here in the rebirth process, the fact that she gave up her own willingness to think for herself, because at that point she did. She let the priest in the church tell her everything that she should do. And she gave up responsibility for her own life. Now, the first habit was she didn't really think for herself. She let her son influence her to the point where it caused so much trouble, and then she let the priest influence her, and she would not make her own decisions, nor would she think for herself. What happened was her ignorance, anger, and pride at that point left her to be reborn in the animal realm as a pet, as someone who has someone else make the decisions for her. Okay? So that was the first foray into this, right? Now the second part, I wanted to see, at one point I wanted to see how the I Ching viewed this on top of the other oracles that I looked at and the other ways, the crystal mirror and everything. I wanted to see what the I Ching had to say. What was the reason for her rebirth? And I asked it very plainly. And shockingly, well, I guess actually not so shockingly, but this is what really gave me chills. And these are the moments that in this realm, this business, in divination, and in these arts, Tibetan cosmology, astrology, divination, the human mind, spirit world, these are the moments that you go, whoa. What was the cause of her death or rebirth as an animal? Number 37, the family. The I Ching came up with concurring information, the family. With a changing line, specifically, the changing line is a father who is richly endowed in mind does nothing to make himself feared. On the contrary, the whole family can trust him because he loves and governs their intercourse. His character of itself exercises the right influence. The family, with a changing line on the father, was the reason for her rebirth. So, her husband. The I Ching then goes on then to say about why she incarnated as a dog. The laws pertaining to the inner structure within the family shows laws operated within the household that transfer to outside life, and the perseverance of the woman furthers, and the foundation of the family is the relationship between the husband and wife. The tie that holds the family together lies in the loyalty and perseverance of the wife. The tie that holds the family together lies in the loyalty and the perseverance of the wife. She was supposed to honor the connection between her and her husband, and she didn't. Why? The next line, the loving reverence of the son. So, and in relation to the son, wind comes forth from fire, which means there was a great deal of anger and chaos, and the influence working from within outwards of wind and fire would be sort of chaotic, forceful, fiery. When you add wind to fire, fire increases. So his rage, his anger, his passions. So the I Ching confirmed everything the same way, which was astonishing. From that point forward, that was changing into, so what was the second part of the story? The second part of the story was what happened in the church, right? Well, this hexagram was changing into grace. Grace brings success. However, it is not the essential or fundamental thing, is only the ornament, and therefore to be used sparingly and only on little things. Basically, what the I Ching goes on to say at this point is that what the priest told her would excuse her, would make her feel better, what would give her quote-unquote grace, which is probably the word he used, really didn't have any ability to purify what was really going on to her. He basically used superficial means to sort of keep her coming back to him because he wanted to be around her because he had feelings for her. And in the end, it cost her her ability to purify what was really going inside of her, and now she's dealing with jealousy as a dog. This was a really interesting story to see. It was fascinating to see, and I am very grateful to my client for letting me share this with you guys. I've seen a lot. I've done a lot of readings in my life, and I've seen a lot of instances, and I've seen some really, really fascinating things. But for some reason, this one I thought was particularly poignant. Now, there's another thing too, because I was curious, and the client asked, "Well, what is the connection between you guys?" You know, they're supposed to be friends for each other. They're going to help each other provide stability for each other. So, my client is actually providing a stable environment in which she can learn to not let her pride thwart her, and she can learn to start to think for herself, and not let others make the decisions for her. And if she's in a situation where she's frustrated because she's an animal and someone's always telling her what she can and she can't do, that's likely to create a situation where she doesn't want that. And then maybe next time she incarnates as a human being and goes, "I don't want this. No, I'm going to think for myself, because when I don't, I end up in a situation where I'm told how to do everything and I have no control over my life." Because that'll go with her. The memory of that will go with her. Whether or not she realized she was an animal, she may not. She may feel, "Well, no, I don't want someone telling me everything I can and can't do." So the purification takes hold, and then, right? But there was another interesting thing too, in that my client acknowledged that there were some very glaringly obvious things in the story of her canine friend that mirrored some of the things that had happened in her own life. Not all of them, not to the extent that it had, but there were some very, very interesting connections between the two that brought them together to kind of act as a mirror for each other. So that is what I have to share on this particular story. I noted the other day on one like my Facebook group that I was doing this, and someone said, "Hey, I want to know more. Can you share the story?" Well, I'm very grateful again to my client for giving me the go-ahead to do this. There's more. There's a little more. It goes a little deeper. We talked for quite a while about this, and there is more. Actually, everything that happened to her on her deathbed, what she was thinking on her deathbed, it all came through. And what led to her rebirth in the animal realm then was even more clearly defined by where her mind was when she was on her deathbed. But these are the moments, these are the things that I find so fascinating, and so many of us who have had such strong connections to our animal friends, and have had animals in our lives that have changed our lives forever, and have felt such an incredible sense of loss when they've gone, or they felt when the joy of being with them or reunited from the familiarity of having known them before and the strong connection that we had them before. I thought many of you out there might find this to be a fascinating case and a fascinating experience, and so there it is. My experience as Tibetan Bon cosmologist, looking at the connection between a person and their animal friend, and what happened to the animal friend, and then too, it gives kind of a sense too, like of what maybe you can do to help the animal go and not become an animal again, or end up maybe as a human, where they can actually seek enlightenment and evolve and not be limited by the constraints of being animal. One of the things that always used to make me laugh was, and it was sort of a recognition. It's not, I wasn't laughing at her. I was laughing at the recognition of what it's like to feel frustrated that you can't do something. Back to my border collie, I remember she used to be very frustrated at times that she knew where the food was, and she'd be like, she couldn't get it. And His Holiness Padma Gampa Rinpoche would say, "That is why next time you must come back with thumbs." I'm Lucky Links, as always, wishing you success and good fortune in all that you do. Hey, if you'd like to do something like this, look into your past life, an animal's past life, someone else's past life, connection with a child maybe, a lover, whatever, or something similar. We can do a crystal mirror. I can employ the same Tibetan bond processes to those subjects as it did to this one. This was a particularly enjoyable, fascinating one, and I hope it brings help to the client and to her pooch friend, who had really kind of an unfortunate situation, and I'm wishing for her to evolve past that now, so that her next life is more fruitful, and that this life becomes rich with treasure. If you want to contact me to do any of this, 779-302-8009 or conjurehope@gmail.com, or if you want to take a class on how to do divination, how to do tarot, how to do playing cards, how to do crystal balls, how to do Mexican Lotteria, how to do Lenormand, I think that's all of them. Contact me same way. And then if you'd like to get your Tibetan astrology chart done, same thing, 779-302-8009 or conjurehope@gmail.com. Remember, this is not the first time you were here, and sometimes the past, well, pretty much always the past does influence the present. But it's good to understand in some cases maybe why, but not get hooked on the fact that it is. I once heard a woman say she rejoiced in her mistakes and said, "I have been reborn many times and I will be reborn many times again." And she almost liked she almost reveled in the ignorance of it. And it was sort of horrified me. I was like, wait a minute, if we could change it, if we could make ourselves better, if we could move towards enlightenment instead of away from it, wouldn't that be a more satisfactory outcome? Just a thought. You guys have a fantastic week.